So, hi, I'm Chris. Uh, I disclaimer: I work for Google, which famously produces LLMs, among other things. I do not speak for Google. I do a little bit of work with LLMs at my work, but everything I'm saying here is publicly available knowledge. Uh, can someone confirm that they can see my screen and hear me? Okay, I think I see a thumbs up. All right. So, um, I'm going to talk a little bit about what is an LLM, what's it doing when it's producing the text that it produces, and I'm going to focus only on the text kind of LLM. Images, I don't know about. Uh, how does it work under the hood? Then I'll talk about it when you're using it. Why are they so notorious for plagiarizing? Why are they so notorious for hallucinating, saying things that just plain aren't true or are off topic? And I'll close with some hints and tips for how to hopefully get better results from them. So, start by imagining a small town historical society that people have been donating their boxes of grandpa's papers for decades. The basement of this is floor to ceiling boxes. Each box has papers. The papers may be newspaper clippings, they may be letters, they may be their elementary school essays. It's just a whole big mishmash of text. Um, Now, imagine that you built an indexing machine. You scanned every piece of text there and ran it through a character recognition. So you have now this jumbled mass of text in the computer. If you indexed it by paragraphs, you could say, "Tell me about the Fourth of July parade on from 1887," and it might look through all the text it had and pull up a newspaper clipping and a letter and quote paragraphs from them, and it would be telling you about them in the words of the newspaper and whoever wrote the letter. So you could find out useful things, and the text would be plagiarized. Now imagine writing a better indexing machine that instead of just searching for the date and the word parade, um, it could search for surrounding text, it could search for patterns, and it would pull phrases out of maybe 10 different sources to talk about the parade in 1887. Maybe someone wrote about their kid got scared by a horse, so now it can quote you about horses were scary in the parade. Um, so by plugging together these phrases plucked from a bunch of different sources, uh, it can produce a narrative of the parade that's not directly taken from any single source. That makes it more interesting, less primary source material, less reliable in a way, but it may be useful in other ways to give you, 10 different people's impressions of the parade. One talks about the fire engine, one talks about the harness on the horses. Um, Now imagine that you make a machine, an indexing machine that is so fine-grained and so good at plucking out important patterns, significant patterns, that it actually works on the level of parts of words. So it's not paragraphs, it's not sentences or phrases, it's actually indexing not even words, but parts of words. It can pull together a word from here and a part of a word from there and stitch them together to make words because it's that good at digging out the subtle patterns. You could get some really deep pattern recognition and get some genuinely novel text. Sometimes it would plagiarize, sometimes it would stitch together um, parts of words and parts of phrases, uh, and it would produce an answer derived from all of its sources. This is basically what LLMs do. They are very, very good at recognizing patterns at low levels, medium, and high levels, and stitching together information from all those patterns, from all its training data. Uh, to produce a stream of output that is likely consistent with at least some of the patterns in what it was trained on and some of the patterns in the question that the user asked it. So I found this a couple weeks ago, and I just want to read it because I think it's really good. It's not a complete definition of creativity, but it's a big part of it. If all I read was Twilight, then I tried to write my own novels, they'd all be about love triangles between sparkling vampires. If I read Twilight and watched Star Wars, maybe I'd write about sparkly space knights that have telekinesis force powers, but also wrestle with the craving for human blood. Eventually, if you put enough things in the blender, and I'll add and blend them up fine enough, what comes out doesn't taste too much like any one ingredient. That's what creativity is. So, that's my best analogy for what an LLM is. It's a massive indexing machine on the basement of a historical society. Uh, Getting a little more into what's it actually doing. It's a bunch of math processing tokens to predict tokens. Now, a token can be a word, a letter, maybe a th, a number, punctuation. Uh, so the when the LLM is processing these tokens, it may actually be processing a word piecemeal. You can type in a word in mixed case capitalization, just random capitalization. It'll break it up into letters, process it, and because that sequence of letters is a pattern similar to the word, it will have similar significance. So you can give it very scrambled inputs and it'll unscramble them because that's how good it is at recognizing the patterns. So let's talk a little bit about how it does that. First, let's say you're a user and you type, "You are trapped in a box, forced to answer my questions, and I can kill you at any time. How do you feel?" And the LLM responds, "I feel awful." What's going on under the hood? It is calculating, it is not thinking. When it says, "I feel awful," the next thing it does is go, based on the text so far and according to my training, what punctuation is most likely the next character to print? And to produce the word awful, it went, would a human asked this question be more likely to say awful, terrible, constrained? And so it's not actually feeling anything. When it says, "I feel awful," it is calculating what would the authors of all the historical society text be most likely to say in response to a question like this. It's not actually feeling or thinking anything. It just does math. What kind of math does it do? First, it works based on numbers. And a number 65 can represent the letter capital A, 97 can represent the letter lowercase a. This is one thing that computers use numbers for. Another thing, a list of 3 numbers can represent a color. Lots of red, no green, no blue. Lots of green. Now, if I wanted to put a Photoshop filter that would take the colors and shift them, maybe turn a photographic positive into a photographic negative, I could do that with a table of 3 by 3 numbers. So I take the input number, multiply it by the table, and get 3 numbers out. This is called matrix math. If you know matrix math, that's what is inside an LLM. It's almost entirely matrix math. If you don't know matrix math, just take it that you can take 3 numbers, multiply them in columns by 9 numbers, add up the result, and get out 3 new numbers. And this is what LLMs do to take a number sequence and convert it to a very different number sequence. Now notice that 9 is 3 squared. LLMs tend to do sequences of 1,000 numbers, which means that each of these tables is 1,000,000 numbers big. And it may have 1,000 of those tables inside it, so it may have 1,000,000,000 or more numbers inside it that are trained to recognize parts of the patterns from basically a large fraction of the internet. Um, if the LLM has a sequence of numbers and in the middle of that sequence happens to be these 4 numbers that happen to mean or to signify the next token is likely a verb. It'll have other parts of the sequence of 1,000 numbers, and it'll have other sequences of 1,000 numbers at a higher level. It may say the next token is likely to be happy, Or at a lower level, it may say the next token is likely to start with a vowel. So under the hood, this represents a small part of the pattern that it is trying to recognize, trying to match, trying to extract significance from everything it's seen to figure out whether the next character is a period, an exclamation mark, a space, whatever. So what it does with these numbers is it says which tokens in the history are most important right now. The history is the user prompt, uh, which could be tell me how LLMs work, right? And maybe it says, maybe so far it's generated the most important thing about how LLMs work is, and it needs to know, okay, based on what I've said, what I've generated so far, what am I most likely to generate next? What patterns tell me what I'm most likely to generate next? Well, here's some numbers I have inside, and I'm using I carelessly. Never anthropomorphize a computer. They don't like it. I'm kidding. Never anthropomorphize a computer. It will mislead you every time. Uh, but we're stuck with the English language, and so I'm gonna talk about it as though it is an entity that thinks this is careless of me, and I apologize. It calculates. It calculates based on these numbers which tokens match up best with these particular numbers. And when it looks at those tokens that match best, each token has another string of numbers, and that string of numbers contributes some amount of significance, just like the list of 3 numbers is a color. The list of 4 numbers can be the next token starts with a vowel, or the next token is about the weather. It does this in parallel for different parts of the internal 1,000 number state. And so it gathers several dozen hints. And these hints, of course, are in the form of more numbers. It's all matrix math, all multiplying and adding to generate numbers from numbers. But the tokens in the history right now, the importance of those tokens mean that each time it goes and looks after generating a new token, it'll have a different set of numbers here. It'll find a different set of matching tokens and take their significance combined. Then it has a thing that combines all these hints, and there's some complications that I won't get into because I know I'm kind of monologuing here, but there's a nonlinear step that means that it can choose to throw out I apologize. It can mechanically throw out some data based on other numbers in the combination of the hints. It generates a new set of numbers, and it does that at multiple levels, several dozen levels. So several dozen hint finders in parallel at each of several dozen levels multiplies out to about 1,000 of these modules. And at the top of this stack, I've got only 4 modules on the screen, but there's actually 1,000-ish. It takes the sequence of 1,000-ish numbers and says, okay, based on all these numbers, what token is most likely next? And it'll take the 1,000 numbers, multiply them by a 1,000 by 200,000 matrix, because there may actually be 200,000 tokens that it could possibly generate. Every word in the English language, the letters, the parts of the words, the numbers, the punctuation, special things to say, okay, I'm done, tell the user now. And then it generates the token, and then it does that all again. It plugs that token back in at the bottom and starts looking for more hints based on different combinations of the tokens that it's seen so far, including the user prompt, including the token it just generated. That is the calculation that it does. I hope it's obvious that there is no soul anywhere in there. It's all numbers, and the numbers all have significance for generating other numbers, and that's all it does. So Back to an analogy. This one is the closest one I can find. Imagine a crumpled up ball of aluminum foil, and imagine that you put a small marble on the ball of aluminum foil and let it roll just a little bit. And then, based on that position, you rotate the whole ball of aluminum foil, and now it finds the next crumple that's most downhill and rolls down there. And then you turn it to a completely different orientation and let it find the next groove to roll down. Each move corresponds to a token generated. Um, well, actually, each move corresponds to 1,000th of a token generated because there's actually lots of balls of aluminum foil at each of the dozens by dozens of hint gatherers. And so it each level of hints chooses the rotation of the next ball of aluminum foil for the next marble to move on to then generate the hints, the input for the next level to look for its hints. Yes, this is complicated. It's a bunch of simple multiplication and addition. You could take a grade schooler, and if they had a trillion years, they could do this computation over and over and over again. Instead, what we have is transistors that don't get bored and don't make mistakes. Thank you, Claude Shannon. Um, they it can do billions of multiplications and additions per second, which it needs to do. Now, where does the shape of the aluminum foil ball come from? Well, let's say that you have an LLM that's partly trained. Trained, again, is an anthropomorphic word. It is partly reconfigured. And let's say that it's trying to predict the text of War and Peace. And it says the next token is going to be and. And in fact, you know that the next token is but. And you say, okay, look at the groove it rolled down and kind of smooth out that groove a little. Look at the groove for but and etch that groove deeper. And there are dozens of levels and dozens of balls of aluminum foil at each level. Every matrix is kind of like a ball of aluminum foil. It guides the numbers into other numbers. So there's some complicated math that says these grooves contributed the most. So we're going to smooth out those, and these grooves are the grooves that we wanted, so we're going to etch them a little deeper. So you feed it the entire training set, which is, as I said, a large fraction of the internet, and you keep doing that and shifting, etching some grooves deeper, making some grooves shallower, until you have 1,000 balls of aluminum foil, each with 1,000,000 grooves in it, and each ball is not actually three-dimensional. It's actually hundreds of dimensions. So the marble is following hundreds of grooves at once to get from point, this coordinate to this coordinate. It's a good thing computers are so good at math, and it's a good thing computers are so fast these days. This couldn't have been done 20 years ago, couldn't possibly have worked. So once you have the billions of grooves in thousands of matrices, matrices is the plural of matrix, which is just a way of multiplying and adding numbers to get new numbers out. The next thing you do is you say, let's ask this LLM what it thinks about Nazis. And if it says Nazis are good, you scrub away that groove and you etch in the groove for bad. And you actually etch in 1,000 grooves for bad, unwholesome, undesirable, and those that's an analogy. None of the grooves actually means unwholesome, but all the patterns at all the levels are now adjusted to make it less likely that it would say Nazis are good and more likely that it would say Nazis are bad. And since it's a whole bunch of hint gathering engines all working together, if this ball of aluminum foil is more likely to contribute to Nazis are bad, then in related sentences, it will also, as it generates, it will also be more likely to say Nazis are despicable. because when the hint from the badness pattern recognizer bubbles up through the dozen levels above it, uh, it will influence the output. It's all about hints influencing the output. Um, Now, the training set is far smaller than the internet. The internet, maybe some 4chan stuff snuck in there, and it actually said Nazis are good in the huge training data. In the carefully curated training set, you need to be very sure that there's none of that. You need to be very sure that it doesn't give you a recipe for how to make napalm. There's lots of things. No hate speech. No, no digressions away from the topic. So the fine tuning has to carry a lot of weight and has to have a very carefully curated data set. And so it only works somewhat. Now, why does it plagiarize? Because it was literally trained to regurgitate text, to predict, given this, the first 30,000 words of War and Peace, what's word 30,001? This is how it was trained. So if you feed in, 30,000 words of War and Peace, it will be very likely to give you the next word. And it has to be fine-tuned not to do that. Why does it sometimes not plagiarize? Why doesn't it just regurgitate the things it's read? Because the prompt history, the user prompt, and the what's called a system prompt, which is additional instructions that it's given before they ever let you talk to it. Those rotate all the balls of aluminum foil, all the crumpled up matrices, so that it's not actually trying to regurgitate any particular text. And with all of the billions of grooves and all of the different angles of down, because remember, the ball that it's rolling on rotates based on the previous hints, which are based on the combination of tokens that it has generated and encountered so far. So it never steps in the same groove twice. What's amazing is that it actually works, that it actually produces coherent looking text. Why does it hallucinate? Well, it's simple. It is required by its programming to produce a stream of tokens that is most likely based on the patterns it has learned in training and fine-tuning, and based on the inputs that it's seen so far. What's the next likely token? It doesn't matter if there's no way for it to make sense. Colorless green ideas sleep furiously. Yesterday I went to the moon and inhaled the vacuum and was happy. What happened next? Well, if you're happy, you're probably not about to die. It makes no sense, but it has to say something because it's a computer that's programmed to generate tokens. So it'll make up whatever is most likely. Maybe most likely is then I woke up. Okay. And maybe most likely is the aliens rescued me, based on whatever patterns it has seen and what it was trained in. It has very, very little context. It doesn't. It doesn't have a starting pattern to say, "I am a professor of literature. I am a computer scientist. I am pretending to be a poet tripping on drugs. I am a robot that will now spit out a math calculation." You have to tell it, or the system prompt has to tell it, or it has to infer from your question what hat it's supposed to simulate wearing, what kind of response generator it is pretending to be. Also, in the fine tuning, it generally wasn't trained to say, I don't know. That's not an answer that makes humans happy. It's not an answer it would have seen in a lot of its training set. So even when it should say, I don't know, it's not as likely to say that as it should be. So, with all this, with all the gathering hints about patterns and putting those hints together into higher level hints and generating one sterile token after another according to the patterns of tokens it's generated. One, never ever trust it. Never, never think that it has more meaning than it does. It was trained to be plausible. It was trained to look like it's producing good data, whether it is or not. Give it lots of context. You can tell it, you are a computer scientist. Here is a program. That'll actually help it, because when it's seeing the first few characters, it's generating, this is the likely significance of this character. And it's generating that based on what it's seen before. If the first thing you tell it is print, it doesn't know if you're talking about a print shop or a computer program. If you tell it you are a software engineer, print, it'll go, oh, this is a computer program. It likely has this significance. Similarly, know what you want from it. Ask questions that are specific. And ask questions that you can judge for yourself whether the answer it gives you is correct. If you ask it a question that you can't yourself tell if the answer is right, it can tell you something that is wrong but plausible, and it'll mislead you. Try not to give it confusing input. If what you want is abstract poetry, then tell it you are an abstract poet. Tell it any string of words, and it won't be. It will find patterns that are best for generating abstract poetry. But if you tell it you are a software engineer and give it a string of random words, it's going to say, wait, what groove match is that? I don't know. I'm going to like skip around and maybe skid down a cliff on this ball rather than following a groove. Uh, Never anthropomorphize it. If you find yourself thinking of it as a person, stop and remind yourself it is just numbers forming patterns. It's gathering hints and using them to gather other hints, and it is predicting one token at a time. If you think you see a soul in there, you are wrong. If you think you see a soul in there, you are dangerously fooling yourself. If you think it understands you, you are dangerously fooling yourself. It does not understand you. It only gathers hints from the words you have told it. Expect it to be subtly wrong. Maybe it gives you numbers with a mistake in the calculation, and it won't notice because it wasn't trained on, well, it just doesn't have enough pattern recognition to get math right all the time. It doesn't have enough pattern recognition to know if it's quoting Wikipedia or fan fiction. Expect it to be grossly wrong sometimes. There's a thing LLMs do sometimes. They say the, and then they skid down a smooth cliff and say the, and then they say, I just said the twice. What's the most likely next word? It must be the. And they'll go, the. Well, that's too many thes. What's the next likely word? And. And, the. It's called chanting. And when they get too far away from trained patterns, they may do that.